Good afternoon, everyone. We are back with another in our series of conversations about leadership, ethics, and the public trust from the Seidman College of Business here at Grand Valley State University. Today's title, Working with What the Digital World Has Wrought, Zombies, Peter Pans, and Prodigies. And we'll talk more about what the title itself means with our two distinguished guests, Jeff Cousy, whose slide you saw, a longtime friend and founding member of the KBI, owns a company here in West Michigan, and Baroness Susan Greenfield joining us from the United Kingdom, neuroscientist, broadcaster, popular science writer, among many other things as well. So we're going to talk in the 45 minutes we have about the topic many people are talking about. What impact has the digital world had on us in terms of our ability to learn, to work, to concentrate, to establish friendships, etc.? I'm going to start with Jeff Cousy. He brought this topic to me. I assume it's something that he's been thinking about and seeing the effects of in his business. So Jeff, can you say a word about how you want to frame this?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'm going to apologize in advance. I took a tumble last night and have been confined to my home. I really can't walk. And in my home, I have two large dogs who chose literally a minute ago to start barking. So unfortunately, I also can't chase them down and pen them up because I can't walk. So hopefully they won't interrupt too much. So this came about, I was actually at a board of directors meeting, and one of my fellow directors is the HR manager for a very large tier 1 auto manufacturer. And she was telling the group how they had commissioned some consultants to come in and begin interviewing employees because they were having just staggering problems with attendance, with people not showing up, not calling, with people walking off, people showing up late, and a certain amount of also kind of just rising rudeness and hostility in their manufacturing workforce. Well, that can always, depending on where you are and the circumstances, always a little bit of a challenge, but it just had gotten decidedly worse. And in the course of that conversation, I said to her, if I had an employee who had been a stable employee and doing a good job and suddenly started missing work and acting different, I would normally think, well, substance abuse. It would be on my list as one of the things to consider. And that was probably tickling around my brain just because of all of the articles written about how social media and other digital products are so carefully engineered to engage our attention, to manipulate our emotions, cause us maybe to behave differently. I'm sure that with COVID and other things, it's not the only thing going on. It may not, maybe I'm just way off base, but as I talk to manufacturing leaders and I spend a lot of time chatting with folks, sort of our bag of tricks for trying to keep people engaged is just not working. And I'm wondering, so I said to this HR director, maybe it's your environment. I'd love to hear what you find, but I'm not sure it's not the larger environment. I will say the flip side of that is, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, so let's just call it 200 years, particularly in the kind of workplace that I have, we've done a lot to make the work as boring as humanly possible. Not with that as a goal. That's not been the goal. It's been efficiency and cost reduction and everything else. But there is just a ton of very boring jobs. And so it's also occurred to me that maybe people's tolerance in this digital age for just sort of boredom and quiet concentration and paying attention to one thing for an extended period of time, which many of our employees have to do, is just going down. So I was hoping to learn more about that, to become better informed about what might be going on out there in the world. Is it affecting more white collar environments in that way or in different way? And, is our digital culture literally affecting people's brains in a way that's going to require employers just sort of attendance bonus and punishment scoring systems, and a few of those things just aren't going to get us the kind of work that we need to have done. Do we need to consider different things? So luckily, Michael found somebody who can help us with that. So
Yeah, I've been reading Susan Greenfield's work for a while, and a phrase that she used where she was quoted as using in a Guardian article, excuse me, about the infantilization of the brain, especially caught my attention. And so you're giving me the perfect segue there to open the floor to her.
Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon. I'm not quite sure exactly what the time difference is, but thank you very much for this invitation and the opportunity to share these really important concerns, thoughts, challenges that we're all facing, not just in the workplace, but I think in our general society, both sides of the pond. I'm a neuroscientist, and therefore I see everything through the physical brain and what it's doing to the physical brain. And with your permission, I'd like to show perhaps the basic idea that, if I may, so share screen. So I'm going to just show this. Okay. So people often wonder what a mind is, or it's a word that's often, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a word that's bandied around a lot, but it is different from the generic physical brain because it's yours and no one has a mind like yours. And even if you're a clone, that's to say an identical twin with the same genes, you're still a unique individual and no one has ever been like you for the 100,000 years we've stalked the planet, nor will there ever be again. And this is what I think, if I may, that Jeff may have been hinting at is in jeopardy, which is the uniqueness and the power of each individual and enabling to reach their full potential and contribute as much as they can to society and to work. So it all starts really when you're born. And so these blobby bits are brain cells, they're called neurons, and the stringy bits are the connections between them. This is how we all started off life. This is the human brain. And then you can see very quickly, postnatally, over the first 2 years of life, there's an astonishing change in the brain as it grows, but it is not due to the proliferation of the blobby bits, but to the connections between them. So the heart of everything, if you remember anything I'm going to say today, it's the connections between brain cells that makes you the unique individual that you are, because these are forged postnatally. And the reason I say that is because the connections are driven and upgraded and changed every moment you're awake. And this is something called plasticity. That doesn't mean to say the brain is made of plastic, of course. It comes from the Greek plastikos, to be molded. Okay, so why this is important is you imagine going through life and imagine seeing a wedding ring when you're very small, for example. You'll be attracted to it because it's gold and shiny. You won't know what it is, but you might want to put it in your mouth, put your fingers through it. But it's only gradually, as the weeks turn to months, to years, as you have experience of this object and as you hear people calling it certain things and you see them putting it on their fingers, so the connections in your brain will accommodate that, because what the human brain does brilliantly is learn. And so by accommodating and learning from experience, which incidentally is why we occupy more ecological niches than any other species on the planet, you will gradually learn that it's called a ring. You'll learn it's something that goes on fingers. And gradually you'll learn if you see someone with such a thing, it says something about them that is not apparent from the sensory properties alone. You wouldn't know what a wedding ring meant just by looking at it. It's only by experience and by learning it has a meaning, a significance. We call this cognitive, from the Latin cogito, I think, as opposed to sensory. And gradually, as you evolve in life, most normally up until this century at least, gradually, you can imagine you've gone through life personalizing objects and people and things around you. So your mother, to you, if you see her, will be very special. She will mean a lot. If I saw her, with all due respect, I would see her as a generic lady. So it's by personalizing the objects and things around you that actually liberates us from the sensory press of the moment. It gives a depth to our lives and that we can actually have a significance to things. It also helps us to look beyond face value. So you can imagine seeing someone dressed up as a ghost. You wouldn't be frightened. You would understand from your experiences that this was someone dressed up as a ghost. A small child, or incidentally someone with dementia, would have to take that at face value. And because it would be novel, it's potentially life-threatening, they would be frightened. So what happens very sadly with dementia is what I happen to work on. It's not a natural consequence of aging. It's a disease of older people, however, because sadly, if it afflicts you, gradually these carefully curated connections, very gradually, they are dismantled. So someone with dementia will become like a small child again, as perhaps some people listening in will be only too well aware. So this mind is where it all starts. And the take-home message I want to leave, and then I'll shut up for a second, is that everything you do, everything you experience is literally leaving its mark on your brain and evolving you into a unique individual. It follows as you go through life, gradually you become more and more of an individual. Let's be brutal. A very small baby doesn't have a very clear or obvious personality. Gradually this evolves and changes and shapes. And instead of being a bundle of immediate emotions, suddenly they are people that have a past, a present, and a future, that have a unique life story that's in the connections. So I'll just pause there for a moment. I don't know how much you want me to go on about things, but I'll stop sharing and pause for a moment, because I think this is a dialogue and a debate, not a lecture, like I've said. But I hope that's enough to sort of root you in where I'm coming from, because it means that, to echo Jeff's concerns, if we are so much reflecting the environment and influenced by it and curated by it, a screen environment that is effectively only two senses and 3 dimensions, 2 dimensions and 2 senses, hearing and vision. And clearly that's been very different from interacting in a world that has smell and touch and so on. So is that the kind of setting that helps?
No, that's really helpful. Can I, Jeff, unless you want to jump in, can I pick up on that? Maybe to ask one of the obvious questions right off the bat, and that is, Jeff and his colleagues and people in the fields, and I think us too at the university, are seeing that more and more. Susan, in your work, would you say that this equally affects generations? For example, if I grow up with a screen from a very young age, that's going to affect me in one way. But I'm 60, I'm, all of a sudden spending 8 hours a day on screens, different kinds of media. Is that likely to affect my brain finally in more or less the same way? Or are we talking really stark generational differences?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I can respond by initially quoting the Jesuits. Give me a child until he is 7 and I will give you the man. Yeah. So we know that the young brain doesn't have the sales resistance, if you like, that a more mature brain does, because if you are very young, you don't have any pre-existing connections. So therefore you are much more open unconditionally to process and to receive the incoming information, as the Jesuits quite rightly pointed out. As you mature and as you see the world in certain ways, and as you have certain pre-existing connections reflecting from your pre-existing experiences, you will interpret the world now in terms of those connections and those things. So as you are maturing, as you're growing, it means that it's more of a two-way street rather than a one-way street from when you're very young. And I think this is especially the case with what we call apparently digital natives and digital digital migrants, which I think we're all of a generation to be digital migrants, not digital natives. Yeah, where we all had childhoods in all 3 dimensions. I'm sure all of us played outside and made up games from cardboard boxes and so on. Whereas sadly, one of my concerns is that this current generation perhaps don't have that magic of saying, let's make up a game. Let's make up a game, and this stick is a sword or a stick or it's a magic thing or a wand. Yeah. So in answer to your question, it's completely different, because the younger you are, the more literally impressionable you are, because there's nothing to interpret or balance it back with. Whereas as you get older, clearly you meet the sales resistance, which can of course be bad. Sometimes that's rank prejudice and so on. But certainly it's more of a dialogue that you're in. And to me, the ideal is when one still has an open mind, but a mind nonetheless something that is able to make connections and understand rather than just taking things at face value.
Jeff, did you want to pick up on anything there?
Well, one question I would ask is there some sort of a qualitative difference in the kinds of connections that people make, and how does that spill over? So, we're interacting in this environment. We're not face to face. We're not in a classroom. I just noticed in our lunchroom, right? People don't talk to each other anymore. 100% of the people, it is quiet as the quietest library in the world, because 100% of the people are staring at their phone.
Okay, yeah. Well, I should just add before I forget that another big difference is an area of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is only fully mature in late teenage years, early 20s. And I should have mentioned that. I'll come back to your question, Jeff. But this area of the brain is very important because in a sense, it gives you a past and a future. Small children don't have this fully developed. And we know that when people have that area damaged, they are like children again. They have very short attention spans. They're very easily distracted. They are heedless of their consequences. And this was an accident once, a long time ago in the 1860s, of a man who was pushing a bar down on a railway track he was a foreman on. And there was an explosion. It drove it through his prefrontal cortex, and he became like a child again. Someone called Phineas Gage, he's very famous. Anyway, so back to your issue of processing things differently. Yes, I think there's lots of evidence of that because if you take social media, and when people talk about friends on social media, we know that when you first meet someone, and sadly we're disadvantaged in this way because we're not able to shake hands, for example, and we can't even really look each other in the eye. But when you first meet someone, you establish eye contact, you're mindful of their body language, you might touch them even in a business scenario, you'll shake the hands or pat their upper arm or do something like that. Whereas none of those things are available on social media. And therefore it's quite hard. It's a skill you have to learn as to how to interact with someone and how to interpret and empathize with how they may be responding. And if that's not available to you, you're not going to be very good at it because the brain is only good at what it rehearses. And therefore, it will become even more aversive when you have to see. I mean, it's bad enough anyway, so just meeting strangers. But if you haven't rehearsed it and you're not very good at it, you're going to want to instead do it through another way. You'll want to do it through the screen because that's where you're the most comfortable, you're the least threatened. So it is a very horrible feed-forward cycle, I think, where people are not skilled because they haven't had the chance to practice interacting with other human beings, with other people. Yeah. And I think also the other issue with the screen is it's always going to respond to you, and you're always in power, and it's instant in how it responds. You touch or you skim with your finger or something. Whereas in real life, someone might not respond to you. They might ignore you, or they might go away, or even worse, you might have to hear what they have to say rather than just prattling on about yourself. So it's perhaps much harder work talking to someone face to face, both in the toll it takes on you emotionally, as well as having to listen to them. Whereas on social media, you can just hold forth to your audience of so-called friends who aren't really friends at all because they're very demanding. So it's a very, very different scenario, if I'm answering your question correctly, from real life and the real world. It's an instant world. It's one very strong on sensory stimulation, because the screen has to have strong sensory stimulation. Otherwise, why not be in the real world? It's right. So it's bright, it's fast, it's noisy. You respond immediately. You're living in the present. And my fear is that when you do that, because the brain always will be good at whatever it's doing, you're learning to do that. You're not learning to have a longer attention span and to have a past and a future, to plan ahead. You're much more in the immediate world, just like a small child is. So that's what I mean by infantilizing. It's as though we're all volatile 3-year-olds, rather than having long time windows of reflection where you're not getting pleasure out of the sensory press of the moment, but more the value of something that might be happening in the future.
It's interesting that you say that, just anecdotally. We were talking yesterday about a couple of employees who had left within just a couple of weeks of us paying our annual bonus.
Yeah.
And they were like, "What?" All they had to do was just show up mentally for 2 weeks, but they were, I guess it just didn't occur to them.
Yeah, no, I think one could. I've thought of a profile of people who are emotionally very volatile, rather fragile sense of themselves, rather fragile identities, very poor empathy, short attention span, easily distracted. So back to the point that we're talking, I don't think we're necessarily destined to be robots. Some people feel that we'd be turned into machines. I don't think it's that. I think we're being turned into small children in many ways.
Can I pick up on a couple of things? And so the question might have one or two or several parts, depending upon my ability to formulate it here. But are you speaking mostly in terms of causality, or are you talking in terms of correlation? In other words, fairly dire picture that we're all going to be infantilized small children. Do we have enough evidence to suggest that it's causal in terms of screens? And if so, is certain kinds of media or presentation of media are certain platforms worse than others, et cetera. Second part of that would be if it is, and there are studies that seem to suggest maybe across the board on this. Two is, it doesn't seem, like I said in my description, that anybody that, at least that I meet, is readily willing or even able to give up that screen time. So the question of whether it's a real addiction or not is something we can address. And then the third part of that, I can come back to it if you like, is if this is our future, then it's not so much the machines or the companies or even the younger folks adapting to us, it's us adapting to them, right? So the world begins to look maybe quite different. So I'm sorry that was...
Okay, so you remember, I'll try and remember all three. So if I take the first one is what's the evidence? Okay, so there is growing evidence. So in 2009, when I was first interested in this, the reason I was interested in it was there's a debate in the House of Lords on kids on the internet and regulation of pornography, as it turned out. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I didn't speak to that. But when you're in the House of Lords, you speak to an area that's yours. And given I'm a neuroscientist, I thought I would say something very obvious, which was the brain is affected by the environment is changing, therefore the brain will change. And I thought this was irrefutable. But the amount of attention I got, Baroness says computers rot the brain, and a huge amount of opposition, lots of pushback, if you were to look back. Spool on quite a long time now. And again, there's been debates in the House of Lords, which people want to look up, where people are now extremely concerned. And the evidence since 2009, since I first stood up and suggested this, many people now are showing correlations between the amount of time a kid spends in front of a screen and their grade point average, for example, and things like this. In particular, let me plug someone called Matt Mars and Joe Clement, who've written a book called Screen Schooled. They're actually in the US, they're in Washington, and they've pioneered and done a lot. And school teachers really have a ringside seat, and they're not biased because it's their kid. And if they've been in the business a while, as Joe and Matt have, they can see the shift in generations. So they are extremely important witnesses to the kind of issues we're discussing. And I would certainly recommend that book. If people are interested, they can contact me and I'll send them a reading list of all the evidence that there is. So we know that the brain reflects and responds to experience. And therefore, I said, without showing all the slides now, if you want, I can send you a reading list on who that is. Or you could look up Kidron, Kidron, Baroness Kidron, who is in the House of Lords, and she's been really vocal very recently and had two debates, one about 2 months ago, one, in fact, just today. There is one this morning on the problems. And so you could look in our Hansard and see that. The second, what was the second question? It was about addiction. Yeah, okay. So yes.
Yeah. Is it real, and are there maybe different kinds of media? Should we distinguish kinds of media here, or we're just talking screen generally, generically?
Okay. So the digital world, anything that stops you experiencing all 3 dimensions and 5 senses will immediately have an issue. There's a lady in Oslo who's actually looked at the difference, for example, between reading Kindle and reading paper books, and shown that there is a difference, that comprehension is better with hard copy books because you actually have the haptic sense, the sense of touch, where you're actually turning over pages and it's real and physical as opposed to something on the screen. That's one just very small example of how there is definitely a difference. Addiction, okay, so very quickly, addiction. We know that all drugs of addiction, for example, and the base of addiction is the final release of a chemical that I'm sure you've heard of called dopamine. Okay. Now, dopamine is a very hard-working chemical messenger in the brain, so it does other jobs as well, not least it helps you move. It's the chemical that's deficient in Parkinson's disease, for example. But in this instance, and why I'm mentioning it, its relation to addiction can be because this frontal part of the brain that I mentioned a little while ago, the prefrontal cortex, which is not fully operational in children who are very volatile, very in the moment, very emotional. We know that that part of the brain in the adults, when dopamine is released, it inhibits that area of the brain. Okay, so that's one of the models for addiction. And why should it be released? Well, some people take drugs that will release dopamine. If you're very excited, as with drugs such as amphetamine, that will release dopamine. Yeah. Incidentally, another condition that is comparable is schizophrenia that is characterized by too much functional dopamine. And we know that such people have an underfunctioning prefrontal cortex. Other people that have underfunctioning prefrontal cortex and live in the moment are compulsive gamblers. And there's also papers showing that in kids who are addicted to video games, there's an enlarged part of the deep in the brain that releases the dopamine. So you can start to see a connection between dopamine release that dampens down this frontal part of the brain. In children, it's naturally dampened down anyway because it's not fully operational. With people who are taking drugs or are very excited, perhaps in a whitewater rafting or something, it will be released. And in people who are compulsive gamblers, then it's also released. Yeah. So you can start. Incidentally, there's also something that's less obvious and quite fascinating. People who are heavy with a heavy body mass index are more reckless in gambling tasks, and such people also have underfunctioning prefrontal cortex. And we know in all these scenarios, I think people with high BMI and children and schizophrenics, it's characterized by living in a world where you're not heeding the consequences. So a gambler is a gambler because it's the thrill of the moment, the roll of the roulette wheel, the roll of the dice, even though you might lose all your money. Someone who eats a lot, it's the thrill of the food, the taste, rather than the fact you're going to pile on the calories. And that harkens back actually to the very words we use. We talk about having a sensational time, don't we? Sensational. And we don't say it's going to have a cognitive time. No, come. Let's have a sensational time. We talk about letting yourself go and blowing your mind. And those scenarios, which we all like to do from time to time, are all characterized by actually abrogating a sense of self and being in the moment and opening yourself to having a sensational time. Yeah. And the very word in ecstasy in Greek is ecstasis, to stand outside of yourself. So without sounding too garbled, just to summarize, addiction is characterized by excessive release of a chemical dopamine, which inhibits the frontal part of the brain. And that scenario can be seen in children, schizophrenics, people who are gamblers, and indeed kids who are addicted to video games. So that's the sort of basis and why dopamine is so important to this, and how we as neuroscience can bring in, I hope, a contribution to the debate, and that we can actually start to show connections between various scenarios we're familiar with and indeed scenarios that we're concerned about today. Yeah.
Well, if you don't mind, to pick up on that, before there was a third part to that, but I'll circle back around to it in terms of adaptation. But I'm sure you're familiar with some of the studies from NYU and Stanford that suggest that echo much of what you're saying, but also suggest that there are some benefits as well, especially marginalized communities using particular kinds of media, even Facebook, who's a whipping boy for everybody and anybody for many good reasons. But nonetheless, the ability to find community, to find quote unquote friendship, there is a sense of connectedness that actually enhances some mental well-being. Would you agree that if you start to differentiate between uses, how it's used, the age, etc., that there is something to be said for at least parts of it?
Yeah, well, like all things in life, all technologies have clear advantages and disadvantages. I think the clear balance in terms of well-being, I'm afraid, falls on the side that it's not good, because the amount of kids with anxiety disorders now and depression and so on, not least because this cyber world is with you 24/7. You can't walk away from it as you could in the old days. So although sadly it's always been in human nature to be a bully, you could always go home and leave the bullies in the playground. Now you can't. Also, the other problem with this worldwide is that the expectations set, especially to young girls, to be completely beautiful and thin and so on, is a very demanding one. So I think on balance, in terms of well-being, especially for young people, as we've just heard from the lady that was whistleblowing on Facebook, to your upper house, I think, right. There are huge problems with that. That's not to say there are some. Now, for example, I have a 94-year-old mum, and I wish she was IT literate, which she sadly no longer is, because she's getting a little bit confused. Because for someone who's not got great mobility, who can't get out, of course, this is a huge benefit. Or for people who can understand what's going on and can evaluate and balance and process and actually have a mind of their own, yes, of course, it's a fantastic thing. And I myself, as a scientist, I use it all the time to find facts out. Instead of going to the library now, like you, I'm sure you can just dial up something and you can get references and of huge benefits. So I'm not saying that we should all, be like Amish or something and go back to a world where we don't have it. Of course not. But we have to have it as a means to an end, not an end in itself. And what saddens me is many times it's now become an alternative universe. You can get up, you can play games, you can go shopping, you can go dating, or without meeting another human being, ever. Yeah. And so whilst in the old days, people said, oh, well, there was the TV and the printing press and all this, changed people's lives. Of course it did, but it was changing their real lives. It wasn't providing a parallel life. And my fear is, especially for the younger generation, who have not learned how to communicate, who have not learned how to make up a game with a cardboard box or been given that chance, that sadly they're missing out, and they could be, and it doesn't have to be like that. We can have the values of technology, but let's make it serve us and be a means to an end. The big issue is, what is the end? What do we decide? I don't know if you're your parents or not, but what do you want your kids to be? What kind of talents do you want them to have? And when you say it benefits, it does, of course, raise the issue of what do we regard as a benefit? What is it that we have as a priority for human beings to be?
All right. So, Jeff, I'm happy to pick up on that too, but I don't want to step on your toes if you.
No, you're not stepping on my toes. I guess I'm thinking about it. I just wanted to check for understanding. So we have this artificial world. It's giving us narrower feedback of a kind, sort of disconnecting us, and we're literally, even as adults. Now, we could talk about elderly parents. I have my own view on how elderly parents work, but we're training our brains to respond in certain ways, which then involves us further in that world.
Totally.
And oddly enough, like so many things in life, it's not making people happier and more positive, right? It's like good news, bad news drives out good news. And so I guess one of the questions I had is some of the potential hostility, anger, and other thing going is just because the dopamine hit is stronger.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we're training ourselves in real life to
get hooked on sensation.
We're training ourselves off online to misbehave offline.
Yeah. Well,
am I just being a complete?
No. I think we get hooked on sensation because you hear of these adrenaline junkies. So it's almost like instantly dopamine becomes noradrenaline biochemically. So it's that same chemical. So one can get hooked on that sort of excitement, but also if you've lived in a rather fragmented world where you're distant, where you're playing lots of video games, which always has to therefore be violence or sex because you always have to have some action. And can you imagine Jane Austen as a video game? That's what I'm saying. No, that doesn't work. Yeah. And if you're in a world which is action related on the screen, whereas when you read a book, you hear what other people are feeling, or you see the world through someone else's eyes or their character's eyes. So that trains you to actually empathize with others, to see the world as others, whether it's a different time, a different era, or a different place. You are, when you read novels, if they're good novels, experiencing another person's feelings and thinking. When you play a video game, you're shooting someone or raping them or doing extreme things, or the more extreme it has to be, the more fast-paced. Now, clearly that's going to make you a very different kind of person for someone who reads Jane Austen, obviously. And if you do that from a young age, when you haven't read Jane Austen already, and then you're just living in this world that's very fast-moving, where it's action-related with no emphasis on your inner world, and where anyway, everything is downloaded and shared with all your so-called friends, who are not friends at all, of course, but they're a kind of demanding audience where you have to conform and impress and so on. Clearly, you're going to have a very different take on the world from previous generations who had a little private world that no one could enter unless you shared it with them or told them about it. And even then, it was yours. You didn't just download or feel you had to share what you had for breakfast or, like you do nowadays. So I think it's a very different mindset, literally, yes, that we're seeing. And I think there would be a generational difference simply because those of us who were born in the last century actually did, play with cardboard boxes and climb trees and so on. That's not to say this generation couldn't. And perhaps, I think, Michael, to your third question, you were going to ask about what we could do or what we might do, but I don't want
That's the $64,000 question from the audience. especially people who teach or, in Jeff's case, run businesses.
Yeah.
They're seeing all the effects that you're articulating. And the question, of course, is, well, what, if anything, do we do?
Okay, well, of course we can do something about it. I mean, if you just think of smoking, for example, and a few decades ago, people thought that was impossible. Now, relatively few people smoke. And when people are having fun and other people are making money out of it, you find that that's quite a tough call. But fur coats, I don't know where you are in the US, but in England, when I was growing up, every lady aspired to having a fur coat. That was the mark that your husband, it usually was your husband, had made it. This was a high status symbol. Now in England, if you go out in a real fur coat, you would get shouted at in the street and harangued for wearing it. Yeah. So, and it's not illegal. You can wear a fur coat, but no one would, because there's been a cultural shift and a change of attitude. Now, we know, therefore, you don't legislate on these things, but you can change culture. You can change attitudes. But the way you do that, in my view, is not by telling people not to do something on the whole, but by promoting an alternative. A long, long time ago, I used to smoke, and I got fed up with people telling me that I'd get cancer and so on. But eventually I got a book and it said, imagine a world where you have white teeth, where you can smell flowers, where you have a lot more money. And it was all the positive. So I suddenly saw this new me of smelling flowers and having money and having white teeth. New it. And I think what we need to do is to explore an alternative that we can offer people instead of the screen that's more fun, more rewarding, more fulfilling, more attractive. So, for example, reading books to your kids at bedtime, for example, where you cuddle them and you read a book, and that enables them, even if they don't have literacy skills at a young age, to actually start to imagine the characters, to actually empathize with the character rather than just going for the action-based things. That's the first thing. Second is sport and physical activity. Again, we all know that promotes endorphins, the naturally occurring opiates. We know it keeps the waistline down. And I don't know about you, but I know if I've gone for a run, I always feel I can cope with problems. It doesn't make them go away, but you feel across them in a way that you can't otherwise. And you feel in control. And of course, if you're playing sport and you're doing sport, you can't have your mobile on you, your cell phone on you. So that's another one. The other is eating together. The very word companion is with bread. Yeah. And how many people now, and I know it's hard for modern families, perhaps to sit around a table and ban the cell phone and to time it, but just occasionally to actually eat with other people, because you're talking, you're in a window, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's ritualized. Since the dawn of time, we've done this. So eating together, reading, physical activity, in my view, are all things that have been done for generations. And if only we could reintroduce those activities in our lives, even though we have phones and have cell phones and have computers, I think it would be a benefit. But for me, the answer lies in reintroducing a life narrative. Because at the moment, everyone talks about multitasking as though it's a great thing. It's a bad thing, because what the brain gains in width, it's losing in depth. And what you need is to give people back a past, a present, and a future, a linearity, rather than just being in the moment and sensationally driven. You want a world that has an A, if A equals B, then B equals C, then A equals C, because that is what a thought is. That's how a thought is different from an emotion. If you're having an emotion, it's just in the moment, whereas a thought, literally, you end up in a different place than where you started. And in order to do that, you have to have a time window and a sequence of steps. So that's echoed in stories, which is why I wrote stories. It's echoed in your life story. And that's what the prefrontal cortex gives you. So activities such as gardening or cooking are activities where you have a beginning, a middle, and an end that aren't all at once and are in a certain order. And I think those things, music, those things are very important for perhaps reintroducing to people an escape from the present moment and bookending it with your past and the future. So I would suggest things like playing music if you can, playing sport, gardening, cooking, things like that, which are very straightforward activities to do.
No, I'm inspired and love to do all of those things, but it brings me back to Jeff's initial point about, for whatever reason, having organized work to be about as boring as possible outside of those of us who are fortunate enough to be in, obviously highly cognitively demanding positions. And so I guess I want to put this back on Jeff, because as you think about what Susan is saying, I mean, that sounds like a heavy burden in terms of both the educational system as families, and obviously the reorganization of work is implied there in some way.
So I won't read to you, but when we were talking about this the other day, my mind immediately went to John Ruskin, who in 1850, 51 to 53, wrote a book, a chapter of a book, Stones of Venice, which was as much of an indictment of how work was being organized as you could ever read, and how it, in many ways, was organized to be dehumanizing. For people, to a very large extent, that's he was a political economist. That ship has very much sailed for any individual employer, right? You could choose to get out of it, but so I'm not advocating for this. I'll tell you where my mind goes, and it's not solving the problem. It's in fact trying to work around it. One place it goes is trying to figure out how to select the folks who have been least damaged by this. So just like not hire the folks who have been completely infantilized. That's one place it goes. The other place it goes, and this is happening now. We're not really in a place to do this, but everyone I know is putting as much effort into eliminating people as possible, and automating the boring jobs. So that's another thing, Michael, that I know you've talked about. In the KB, the business initiative has talked about is this ongoing progress of eliminating human work with robots and other machinery. This is just more fuel on that fire. It's because it's not just you. It's one thing not to be able to find people, which is a little bit of an issue now, which is not entirely connected with this, but it's another thing just to have people who can't function. Like they cannot work cooperatively. They can't participate. They can't even participate in the interesting parts of work when it comes up, right? Because they don't know in a meeting where you're seeking ideas how to interact appropriately, or they can't solve problems on the shop floor. They can't work through the personal problems. At that point, it's like we have to find a machine to do this. So that's a whole different future. So as an individual employer, I don't see a real. I could start a gardening club, but I can't make people go to it, and they're going to say, "Well, I'd rather be on my phone."
So soon we have a couple minutes left. You do paint a lovely kind of Rousseauian future in some ways. Jeff and his compadres will build the machine.
Scientists are always optimists. We have to be optimists because our experiments don't usually work. So you have to have a glass half full rather than the other way.
Of course, I'm happy to hear it. His concerns obviously are real. I'm sure you talk to professors who tell you that it's very hard to get attention in classes. On and on it goes. Oh. So everything you're suggesting makes sense to me. But as you look at the future, do you see signs where this is happening, or do you see signs of people laying aside the tools of technology and re-engaging?
So let's look at the pandemic, because I think this is something. Now, in the UK, as in your country, everyone was in very serious lockdown. And when gradually the restrictions got lifted and people escaped from their cyber world, the world went mad. Now, surely that is an experiment, admittedly not a very controlled one, in how people really want to live in 5 dimensions, and they value that. Everyone got fed up with Zoom calls. Everyone was really relishing just seeing each other again, as though we'd been in prison. Now, that surely speaks to some optimistic approach to human nature and how it really in the long run. I think perhaps the screen technologies are because people are frightened, or because they don't feel very self-conscious, or they feel self-conscious, they haven't got great self-worth or low self-esteem, any of the above. And these are things we can work at. And just to Jeff's point, there's an interesting study, and I've got the reference if people want, of taking kids who weren't very good at social skills. These are young teenagers. And they took half the kids and confiscated their mobiles for 5 days and sent them to some summer camp or something. And then afterwards, you can know what I'm going to say, obviously, the kids that had 5 days without cell phones in summer camp were already significantly better than the kids that hadn't, right? So now you could say, well, it's the summer camp, not the absence of the phones, but clearly you have to do something. So the human brain is infinitely plastic. And rather than give up on people, we have to think of ways in which we can make it more attractive. And of course it's hard. Life is hard. Things are hard. This is a challenge. Of course it is. But that means that we can't do it and it's not possible. You just have to think and talk to neuroscientists and just think of ways that we can do this to give people, and I think what's at the heart of it is giving people a sense of individuality and a sense of worth and esteem. And in terms of employers, I often have to talk about what's the difference between a leader and a manager. Yeah, and I'd say, well, a leader is someone who has a vision, who can actually say, let's do this, and imagine if we could do that, you could do that. And that's what turns people on, at whatever level and however unskilled you are. If you actually treat people and show them where you're going, I think that you get much better results than if you just say, do this, do that, switch this off, press that button. No one wants to be treated like a machine. But if you actually share with people what your vision is, this might sound naive and Russian and so on, but I think, heavens, you have to start somewhere. We have to do something. Yeah.
No, I think that's a lovely sort of summary and final statement. Thank you so much. Well put.